and welcome to Book Solid, the New Canaan Library podcast. I'm Sam.
And I'm Kathleen.
And we are still recording on Skype. We're still social distancing at the library. So I apologize in advance for any sound quality issues or if our dogs start barking, anything like that. We're still in a full-blown pandemic with increasing cases. The library is open. You can find out information about our limited express service on our website at newcanaanlibrary.org. So this is season 2, episode 2, season 2.
So the book that we read for this month is The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which is probably one of the most hyped books that we've ever covered on our podcast, because this was the prequel to The Hunger Games that came out earlier in 2020. There was a lot of excitement when it came out, and maybe a little less when people found out that it was about Coriolanus Snow rather than Katniss. It's a really fascinating story that's set during the 10th annual Hunger Games. This is basically his one shot after the family's fallen on hard times. So he is assigned this female tribute from District 12, Lucy Gray. He has to do whatever it takes to have her survive, basically. And it's all about the choices he makes and their entanglement together, and some of the good things and some of the bad things that leads to ultimately how he becomes the character we know later.
So our podcast initially started as a young adult teen book brunch, and then we turned it into a podcast. Now in season 2, we've really expanded it to include young adults, new adults, and those that are forever young adults at heart. So we're really capturing an adult audience that loves to read YA. I spent a lot of time at the New Canaan High School Media Center, and I got to know Megan Mabey, who works there. And she recently wrote this fascinating article in Book Riot called How the Hunger Games Prequel Helped Me Realize I've Changed. And I was really lucky I got to speak to Megan a little bit about that earlier today. We have a special guest on the podcast this month. I have with me today Megan Mabey, who works at our local New Canaan High School. And I just wanted you to say hello and tell us a little bit about what you do there, Megan.
Hi, Sam. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I'm so honored to be here. I'm a library secretary at New Canaan High School Library, and this is my second year there. I graduated with my master's in library studies from UNC Greensboro in 2018. So this is like my first library job out of library school, and it's been really exciting getting to work with the high schoolers, and I love reading YA, so it's been so fun being around all these YA books and talking books with everybody here, so it's been great.
So I've been lucky enough to work with Megan pretty regularly as a volunteer. It's sort of part of the outreach that I did when I was a teen services librarian, and Megan is absolutely terrific and enthusiastic. We always chat about books together, and I'm excited because we are discussing The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. And what's so interesting about that is that our podcast is now for teens as well as adults. And Megan wrote this amazing article in August of this year in Book Riot, talking about that experience of what it was like revisiting Panem, something that you loved as a teen and you revisited as an adult. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I was very excited when I heard that Suzanne Collins had this new prequel coming out, because it felt like a really big throwback that this series that I loved when I was newly in college was suddenly having like a new story added. I first became aware of the Hunger Games when the first movie came out. Like, I saw the trailer and I thought, this book series looks amazing, I have to read it. And I think I was like 18, I was at UConn. And so I read the whole trilogy like right away and loved the series. And I remember my parents saying to me, like, how can you like this series? Because there are kids like have to murder each other in this Hunger Games. And that's violent. We're surprised that you're enjoying this story. And I just told them, like, it's a story and it's just fiction. And I think it's really interesting, even though it is very horrific. Like, I am interested in the storyline and in Katniss's journey. So I completely defended the series and loved it. But coming back to it now, 10 years later, I felt differently. And I think my age has something to do with it. And I think having had my son, who's 2 now, like, has affected my mentality. So it was a different reading experience for me this time around. And maybe having President Snow as the protagonist had a little bit to do with that too. But yeah, it was a different experience.
I love that you talk about how reading the book, it wasn't just about hearing about Snow's backstory, but also it caused a lot of introspection for you, what it's like as an adult versus what it's like reading as a teenager. And you ended your piece with growing up isn't such a bad thing, though I don't think the nostalgia of youth will ever truly fade. Though I miss the carefree joy of my childhood, I'm proud of the person I'm growing up to be. So, did you enjoy the book with this new perspective? Did it still manage to be fun for you? Because yes, as a mother, the horrors of the Hunger Games hits differently, but were you able to slip back a little bit?
Yes and no. So I would still recommend the book as being read, and I'm really glad that I read it because as a fan of the Hunger Games world, I needed to know what happened. It's one of those like you need to know. But I'm also the type of reader who I really love to love my main character. And there's even something I've heard about in like the writing world, like called the save the cat thing with a main character, where if they do something like save the cat in the beginning of the story, you feel for the character and you're invested in them. And when it came to President Snow, we obviously knew going into the story that he's going to grow to become more evil later on in Katniss's stories. So we knew that going in. And so I felt it was kind of like an Anakin story in a way, like with Star Wars, where you know that he's going to get dark later on. But I still enjoyed it. But for me, I could see hints of President Snow always kind of being in it for himself throughout the whole story. And so I didn't love him as a character, though I think Suzanne wrote him well. I did really like Lucy Gray Bard's character. I found was very interesting, and I would have loved if the book alternated perspectives with Snow and Lucy. But I think her character like really added to the story, and I loved her ballads, and it definitely gave this very like ancient air to Panem. Like this is a piece of Panem's history, and these ballads that she sings are a part of history for this world. So I loved that aspect too. But I think it was definitely worth reading.
So if the movie comes out, will you watch it?
Oh, I totally will watch it for sure.
Well, thank you so much for talking to us. We're going to share the link to your really fascinating article on our website when we post this podcast. It was so nice of you to take the time to talk to us today. I really appreciate it. I miss being there and seeing you.
Well, thank you so much, Sam. I loved being on your podcast today. And I remember when you would tell me about this podcast when you came to the library, and it's so exciting to help be a little bit a part of it. So we miss you too.
Take care, Megan.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
So that was so cool. Megan is so much fun. I miss stopping into the library. I used to go twice a week and catch up with her and hear all these great things she's doing, as well as hearing about her little boy. But she touches on this fascinating idea of revisiting something you've read as a teenager, that you loved as a teenager, and here you are 10 years later. I think it is about 9 years since the last publication of the book. Anyway, it's fascinating to read it with all of this time in between. And I'm dying to know, what did you think?
So I think that was a great interview to lead from, because I was a little bit older when I first read The Hunger Games, but certainly anyone who's reading a book 10 years ago and reading something now, it feels so different. You have such different thoughts about it. And of course, this is a different character that we're dealing with. So I have to say it doesn't capture the excitement of the Hunger Games for me, as just I raced through every single book in that series I read in one day. I mean, it was the kind of thing I couldn't get enough of. So this took me longer than that, unfortunately. But it still had all of that same really interesting political intrigue and such vivid world building and these characters that I was completely fascinated by. So I think in that sense, it did remind me of the Hunger Games. I don't know. One of the things that I wanted to ask you was whether it changed your perception of the series or added to it in any way, or if you even feel like it is a necessary addition. Because I think one thing that I do struggle with is, why this? Why now? Did it have an effect on me, or is it just kind of an interesting addition that doesn't affect the story?
Gosh, so much to unpack here. First of all, it's not a secret. Kathleen knows this very well. I don't like series. I don't like things that become almost an institution bigger than itself. I love standalones. I don't want to keep going back and coming back. Some people love that. They want all the details. They want all of the backstory. That's not something I wanted. I was very hesitant. I did not want to read a Coriolanus Snow redemption story. He was a surprising pick for me. I was very surprised reading the book that it humanized him. I got lured in. I found myself rooting for him. I was worried for him. I felt he was more interesting than he was in the original trilogy in this book. You learn about how hard his family fights to survive. So the capital is under siege after this, failed rebellion, and we get to keep all of the gore and the darkness and the nastiness of the original Hunger Games, the violence. There's cannibalism in the streets basically after this. And this is where the dilapidated Snow family is struggling. Every ounce of him is really pulled into trying to maintain his family name, even though they're completely destitute. And that's how this whole thing comes in. It's interesting that the original Hunger Games was so beloved because we had this heroine in Katniss Everdeen, and she's just this badass with a bow and arrow, and she's fearless and she's brave and she's headstrong. And Snow is certainly not that. He's such a flawed character. So as a student prior to university, they decide that they have to mentor the participants in the Hunger Games. And so he ends up having this woman from District 12, which is the same district as Katniss, and her name is Lucy Gray Baird.
I think this is really when it picks up for me. I mean, I think just Snow by himself, it's hard to maintain that level of interest because I do agree the way that he's introduced, you feel a great deal of sympathy for him. And just the idea of the capital, which we see as this place of extreme opulence later on, the way that it has fallen on hard times and everyone is struggling despite the fact that they have these family names that are quite celebrated and his family in particular. I don't know if I could just stick with Snow and feel that there was enough tension, that there was enough to maintain my interest. And I think it really picks up when Lucy Gray appears, both the way they interact and just the type of character she is, which there are a lot of Easter eggs, which I think is nice. You can see sort of that path from Lucy Gray to Katniss, but at the same time, I think she is a very different character, which I like.
Yeah, so Megan mentions that she was sort of her favorite part of the book. I felt a little bit, okay, my expectations were exceeded in how Suzanne Collins treated President Snow and his whole backstory. I felt a little bit that Lucy Gray was designed to answer all of this, to answer to all of this. She's designed to be a lovable heroine, but so different from Katniss. She's designed to be the foil to Snow's regimented, meticulous, almost mercenary approach to the world. It was fun, but I think it kind of falls apart. And then they have this whole love story, right? And that's a plane crash of a love story. I think the pacing is problematic. You have this whole part before the Hunger Games, and then you have this almost shortened version of the Hunger Games that ends abruptly based on the fact that Snow helps Lucy cheat, she wins, but then he gets sent to being a peacekeeper. And I'm completely confused because I read the physical book and I saw that there were very few pages left and there was so much to wrap up, and it's done in such, parts of it were slow, parts of it were too fast. I almost felt like it was the cliff notes of another trilogy squashed together, and it was a little unsatisfying for me that way.
I could definitely see that. I think the pacing was the part that was the biggest disappointment for me. There were times when I was reading it and couldn't get enough, and then there were parts where I kind of had to struggle to pick it up. If it had been, I mean, it's hard to say. I don't want to read a Snow trilogy. So in that sense, I'm glad it was only one book. I think that would have been excessive, but I agree that it has the feel of a trilogy. And maybe if it had been developed that way, maybe if we had spent more time on the Hunger Games in one section, and then on the Peacekeeper. All of that stuff was interesting when it got going, but the pacing was very odd. And it just seemed like maybe too many ideas that weren't parceled out in the best possible way.
I just realized for the third episode in a row, I forgot to give the spoiler warning.
Everyone knows now. They know.
Okay, because I'm about to go deep spoiler. So if we ruin parts of it for you, which I don't think, well, we kind of did with Lucy.
We're going to ruin everything.
Yes, we're going all to the end here. Well, there is this open ending where Lucy basically disappears. That is such a weird unfolding. Where was it Snow? Was it Lucy? Was it a trap? You're very confused at the end what the intentions were and what even happens to her. Snow goes on to say, okay, that was messy. I'm glad I'm never going to do that. I think I'm going to marry someone I hate so I don't ever have to deal with messy feelings ever again. I think some readers will love this. People who love series, people who love to revisit Harry Potter over and over, people who want to know how Darth Vader went dark, chose the dark side. Like, people will love that. There are these great Easter eggs. There are these great nuggets. I think Suzanne Collins did a great job reverse engineering the story. All of these revelations happen, and they're kind of neat to come across. But there's the other argument. In some ways, does it degrade the original story? Did we need this? I find it fascinating that a lot of people I speak to, Megan, in terms of her reflection, she's thinking, she's introspective. She thinks I'm a different person now. I know somebody who loves it and just couldn't get through it. And I'm going to play something for you. This is the one teenager I got to speak to regarding this situation. And I asked her, and I'll play it for you right here.
So did you read The Hunger Games? Yes, I basically grew up on it. And do you plan on reading Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes? Not at all. I don't want it to ruin my childhood.
There's a lot of that vibe out there. Like, it was great. I don't want to go back. I think there's so many mixed feelings going into this.
I think the interesting thing is that when this book was announced, there was an immediate yay no, because we heard the title, we heard that it was in the Hunger Games world, and then immediately heard that it was about Coriolanus Snow. And obviously no one likes President Snow. He's a terrible person. He's Katniss's nemesis. And I think that is kind of an interesting, and obviously Suzanne Collins knows this. I think it's a subversive choice. It's not an accident. I don't think that's secretly her favorite character. So I think it's very interesting to see, well, why is she interested in this? And it just seems like, with the way the Hunger Games was maybe a reflection of what she was thinking about in what was going on in the world back however many years ago when she wrote it, 10, 15 years ago, maybe we are seeing that things were in motion well before now that create things. So maybe, for example, the Hunger Games, we don't know why Katniss's world looks like that. This book explains it. And I do think it gives some information that really does clarify it for me in a way that I enjoy. But it's also, I think it's it's grim and cynical. I think this book doesn't have the release of joy in the Hunger Games. You don't get that ultimate feeling of something good happening. It's just the spiral into darkness.
I agree with that. It's really, you don't. And I think that's why Lucy is this accessible heroine, which is so different than Katniss. She's colorful, she's warm, she's full of song, because this book so desperately needed that color and levity, that payoff. I just find that romance between the two of them to have really been, it was tragic and flawed, and it was destined to fail, not just as a plot, but because of the fact that what was so great about the love triangle in the original is that it evolved over 3 books. It was something you could see the connection. And here it was just brief and then confusing and then just gone. And so it's really interesting how she does revisit this, and she's trying to tap into, it sold millions and millions of copies. People just absolutely loved it. And I don't think that passion is captured here with Snow's story. I know I've mentioned this before. As you know, I love standalone books. Maurice Sendak when he wrote Where the Wild Things Are, the entire world pressured him to do a sequel or a series, and he refused to. And I think the editor of I read a book about her, Ursula Nordstrom. It's a fascinating story, how she protected him from that. There's something I really respect about this is great the way it is. Let this be a classic. Let this stand the test of time. And I don't want the prequel. This is our second prequel in a row, Standalone Sam. And I don't want the play version or the poetry version or somebody else's point of view over the same exact thing. And so this was tough for me. Of the people I know who actually did read it, it was readable. It was interesting. I definitely got swept up in the story. Suzanne Collins' storytelling is still spot on. It's lots of interesting characters. There's not enough time to go into all of them. I can't pronounce half of them. But Sejanus, I believe, is one that I absolutely loved.
I love Sejanus. I mean, you know he's going to break your heart. You know it's going to end tragically, but he's such a kind person. You really want the best for him.
That whole story tears your heart out. The fact that he's mentor to someone that came from his original district that he knew, and how that ends in violence and pain, and how I know it's my turn to read a quote, and I almost read the quote, big spoiler, of Sejanus's hanging at the hanging tree.
Oh.
But I thought that was just a cop out on my part. It was.
You didn't want to edit out my crying, is that?
It's just too obvious because it was so heart-wrenching the way it was written and the way Snow's approach is. I mean, he's basically the reason why Sejanus dies, right? Because he has the Mockingjay. I'm getting my J's confused. There's the Mockingjay, the Jabberjay, and the recording device J records Sejanus basically telling Snow all of his plans basically to become a rebel. And Snow, of course, sends it off to the capital, and he gets hung. And it's so dark the way Sejanus's parents is basically adopt the full-grown Snow, and he's their heir, and that's how the whole Snow family dynasty is saved, right? And it's
that detail is, I mean, I think it's really spot on. I think it was a clever touch, but it's devastating. It's so upsetting. I'm still upset thinking about that.
Yeah, we still have that artful devastation. It was part of the reason why I really wanted to share Megan's article with our listeners is because she really taps into that. Do you have a higher tolerance for that as a teen than you do as an adult or as a mother? She sees it so differently. And I do feel like my teens are better equipped to deal with heart-wrenching violence or things. I think they can compartmentalize that in a way that you can't as an adult who actually has, you have had these experiences where they're devastating, more so than your teenagers. Yeah, Suzanne still is able to build you up, make you really crazy about a character, and then completely destroy you. So thank you, Suzanne. That was lovely. I do have a quote to share. Again, I decided not to pick that one, but I thought this was a really great quote. So what happens is Snow is completely insulted. He gets the District 12 tribute, right? Because he was expecting to have more pull than that. And so not only that, the female tribute. So he's all upset about that. This is really interesting because she actually, over the course of the book, she has such a profound effect on him and his development, even though he rejects all of it at the end. But he basically tries to help her. He ends up in a zoo cage, and that's something we didn't even talk about, how in the Hunger Games the tributes are I mean, it's like Emerald City, right? They get that new clothes and makeup and all of this food. And here in the 10th Hunger Games, in the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, they're treated like wild animals and thrown in cages. This is the scene of Coriolanus Snow waking up basically in a zoo next to Lucy. Coriolanus tried not to panic, but he could feel sweat running down his sides. All the faces of the nearby tributes, of the crowd at the bars, began to blur. Their features became indistinct, leaving only dark and light patches of skin broken by the pinkish red of their open mouths. His limbs felt numb, his lungs starved for air, He was beginning to consider making a break for the chute and attempting to climb it when a voice behind him softly said, "Own it." Without turning, he knew it was the girl, his girl, and he felt immense relief that he was not entirely alone. He thought of how cleverly she had played the audience after the mayor's assault, how she had won them all with her song. She was right, of course. He had to make this moment look intentional or it was all over. He took a deep breath and turned to where she sat, casually fixing the white rose behind her ear. She always seemed to be improving her appearance. He extended his hand to her as if she was the grandest lady in the capital. The edges of Lucy Gray's mouth curled up. As she took his hand, her touch sent a tiny electrical spark up his arm, and he felt as if a bit of her on-stage charisma had been transferred to him. He made a small bow as she stood with exaggerated elegance. She's on stage. You're on stage. This is the show, he thought. He lifted his head and asked, "Would you care to meet a few of my neighbors?" "I would be delighted," she said, as if they were at an afternoon tea.
That's a great quote. What I really like about that one too is this. I think we've emphasized how different they are in some ways, but this is the scene where I really see how similar they are and how she's having an effect on kind of the way that Snow cultivates his personality later on. And even that rose that she has in her hair that I didn't really pick up on before. I mean, he's associated with those roses later. Like it's really nicely done. I think Lucy Gray is such an interesting character because she is calculating. I'm not saying she's a bad person, but she definitely has that level of how do I manipulate the crowd in my favor.
They really become partners in this, and that I think is one of the highlights of this book. I really enjoyed that part of it, how they play off of each other, how they become to rely on each other and care for each other. There really isn't enough time to develop that, I think, in this book. And the way it unravels is so unsatisfying for me. You're definitely taken along this wonderful ride along the way. So kudos to that. And I think everybody who reads this book, knowing the Hunger Games trilogy, is glad they read the book. And it's readable, even though the pacing can be disjointed. You're not slogging through. It's a fascinating ride. So, do you have any read-alikes for us?
I do. You know, this book has so many different kinds of elements. So I was thinking about, obviously, like the dystopian stories like the Hunger Games, but also villain origin stories and just this kind of prequels, as we were talking about. And it taps into a lot of different things. So I have kind of an assortment of books. The first one I wanted to talk about is the Scythe trilogy. The first book is Scythe by Neil Shusterman, and I may have recommended on this podcast before. I love this series so much, and I feel like it really is, if you've already read The Hunger Games, if you've already read a lot of these really popular dystopian trilogies, this is the greatest recent one that has come out and one of my favorite YA series of all times. It's absolutely brilliant. It's basically about this world that starts out sort of like a utopia. Death has been eradicated. Everyone can really live without fear of disease or anything unpleasant even. Everything's kind of taken care of for them. They have these scythes who are basically culling the population so that, you know, everyone's living forever. There's no death. They have to kind of invent death. So it's supposed to be this noble profession that only people who are not swayed by, you know, kind of these worldly like greed or any kind, you know, of course they're supposed to be better than all of these things, but then you start to get these scythes who are not so noble, and then it becomes sort of this dystopian that these two main characters, Citra and Rowan, are navigating as they apprentice to a scythe, and ultimately they're being asked to compete, sort of like the Hunger Games. They're both competing to be his chosen scythe, and then the one who doesn't will be killed. It's such a great series though, and it just reminds me of all of that like really meaty political intrigue and all of the like dystopian world building.
You won't be surprised to know that I read the first but not the second or the third.
The second and the third are incredible. It only gets better, Sam. You need to read them.
Oh, I'm a one and done standalone girl. All right. I will consider reading the second and the third.
They are so good. The second book on my list is Midnight Sun by Stephanie Meyer. So this came out in August and was also obviously very well hyped. This is the kind of mythic, I think. This had been teased for maybe a decade at this point as being the Twilight retelling from Edward's perspective, and it's the same plot as Twilight, and you just get into his weird head. I see you shaking your head. You will never read this book?
I can't. I mean, why? I don't understand this. Okay, so it's not fair, right? Because I should leave my thoughts out of this because I love standalone books, right? Like Maurice Sendak is my literary hero for there not being a seventh iteration of where the Wild Things were, where the Wild Things used to be, where the Wild Things were 64 years ago. But this baffles me. Why would I want to do this? The same plot from a fly on the wall or a different view, or I don't know. Do you think this is something that people are going to really dive into?
I think it's never going to capture the appeal of the original. I think that quality that makes all of these original series so beloved, it's never recaptured no matter what. And I think that's the same for any of these TV shows that come back, anything. I mean, whatever it was, you're still going to get something out of it, but I don't think it's ever on the same level. So I can't say that any of these are going to recapture a feeling for you if that's what you're looking for, but they may remind you of some things that you like.
Well, to be fair, you threatened to pick it as the next book, which would have us at 2 prequels and I don't even know what you call that. Different vehicle? What is that?
This is why I have no idea what you call this, and that's why I don't know how to talk about it.
All right. I will consider reading it.
All right. And then the last one, I was just thinking of the whole, politics and ruthless main characters, kind of villainous anti-hero main characters, and a quest for power. And so my last recommendation is And I Darken by Kirsten White, which is also a trilogy. I won't recommend it to you, Sam, but an alternate history, basically a gender-bent Vlad the Impaler story, which I think is such a great specific premise for a book that I have never seen before. And so just, instead of having Vlad the Impaler, it's this girl who is just completely ruthless. So if you like that, alternate histories, just because we're dropping this in December, I just wanted to briefly plug our newsletter. We come out with a teen newsletter bi-weekly usually. If you want to sign up for that on our website. So we were talking about holiday books was one of the things. I'm a huge fan of this book, The Afterlife of Holly Chase. I don't know really anyone else who has read it. This is basically if Ebenezer Scrooge were a mean girl. And so the premise is that this girl has her Scrooge experience where she's being visited by the 3 ghosts and she's being given a chance to change her ways, and she doesn't, and she dies. And that's that's not the end of the book. That's the beginning of the book. And then it leads to basically her afterlife is being recruited to work for Project Scrooge. It's kind of the sci-fi element where they put together what she saw, these interventions sort of in their dreams that like Scrooge had, and she's the ghost of Christmas past, and they're trying to have people change their ways. So this is sort of her afterlife. And then 5 years later, she finally kind of meets this person that they're trying to help, and it sort of changes her perspective on everything. And it's so much fun. It's such a delightful Christmas read. It's just a nice, warm-hearted book. So I would just love to have someone else read this in the world. So I wanted to promote it.
I'll read that. That sounds right up my alley for right now. Okay, so what are we reading next? We kind of picked this one together.
We did.
So we've been really trying to select books with crossover appeal, and I think this next book really does that. It's called Beartown by Fredrik Backman. What I think is great about this is that it is about high school. It's about ice hockey, which I love. Fredrik Backman writes about the hockey really well and the hockey culture. It's about this small town and their great hope of winning this championship, but there's a rape accusation and how the town deals with that and the fallout of all of that. I'm hoping a lot of our listeners are familiar with Fredrik Backman. He wrote A Man Called Ove, which is spelled O-V-E, and that was a bestseller. People absolutely loved that book. It was so well written. This one has a very different tone, but Frederick Backman manages to really shift across broad topics. He recently published Anxious People, which I just got and I haven't started to read, but that's on my list for the winter. So we are going to be reading Beartown by Frederick Backman. And when we post this podcast, you'll be able to access the link to Megan's article. We'll include a lot of the links to our recommendations, and we will also have the link to Beartown so that you can put that on hold and read along with us. Check our website, read along with us. I hope you read Beartown. We'll be able to drop the next podcast in January. So I hope you guys all have a wonderful holiday.
Bye.